Ahoy! Today we're talking about hunter items, more specifically starter upgrades. And I want to look at 3 starter upgrades specifically, being Death Temper, Hunter's Cowl and Protector of the Jungle, and go more in depth on these items. The reason being that these are the most typical damage focused items that I think most hunter players would consider, along with Death Embrace, but Death Embrace is not damage focused, so it wouldn't really make much sense to put it in this comparison as it's purely sustain focused. Some of these items will also receive changes in the next patch, and with the hunter meta changing with the other items in general, I thought it would be a good time to start looking at these things and then also in a future video discuss the starter items in more depth. But for today, the focus is on these 3 upgrades. These 3 upgrades specifically, different from, for example, the Gilded Arrow variations, come with power and attack speed, which makes them a lot more comparable. Let's look at the stats here first. Death Temper is 2250 gold, Hunter's Cowl is 2200 gold, and Protector of the Jungle is 2150 gold. In terms of total power, they are very close to each other. Death Temper provides 50 physical power, Hunter's Cowl provides 60 physical power, making it the highest one, and Protector of the Jungle, as of patch 8.3, provides 55 power. In patch 8.2 it still provides 65 power. Let's skip over the magical power here since Hunter's Cowl doesn't provide that in the first place. Now we have the attack speed. Death Temper always comes with 30% attack speed, which is a relatively high value. Hunter's Cowl comes with 20% attack speed, but can reach up to 45% attack speed if the aura is applied if a teammate is nearby. Protector of the Jungle now provides 25% attack speed and used to provide 35%. Hunter's Cowl, along with that, also comes with 15% lifesteal, which the others don't provide. Death Temper comes with 100 health instead, and Protector of the Jungle comes with 35 physical protection. Looking at the raw stats here, we can see clearly that when Hunter's Cowl's passive is active, it'll have the highest damage per second, as it has the highest power along with then the highest attack speed. However, this assumes that the passive is active, and this also neglects the passives of the other 2 items, which cannot be described in the same stats as easily. Death Temper's passive, which is now finally functional, provides you with extra basic attack damage. 1 stack per enemy death near you, providing you extra 3.5% basic attack damage for 10 seconds, which can stack up to 10 times or up to 35% extra basic attack damage. Protector of the Jungle, on the other hand, provides you with 12% extra power and protections while you are in the jungle. This makes not only the damaging aspect but also the survivability aspect a pretty complicated conversation. I would argue that Death Temper is by far the least survivability focused item of them all, with only 100 extra health, which really isn't that much in late game. Hunter's Cowl, on the other hand, gets a lot of survivability through 15% lifesteal, but also provides you with a 10% movement speed aura when you don't have any allies nearby, which can allow you to juke further damage better. It also obviously allows you to create distance faster and run away quicker. Protector of the Jungle provides you with 35 protections already, and then also an extra 12%, which is at least 12 flat extra protections if we're just assuming your base protections from yourself, if you have like around 100 protections after the item. But then you also have to consider that further protections like Sentinel's Embrace or Sovereignty would also benefit from the passive further, giving you even more protections. Based on that, the real survivability difference between Hunter's Cowl and Protector of the Jungle is something that you can't necessarily put into numbers, and it highly depends on the situation as well, if the enemy has physical or magical damage, so it varies a lot. But both provide survivability in their own rights. We're looking at hunters, so that's not what we're primarily here for, we're looking for damage. There's an important thing worth keeping in mind when it comes to damage with these items. They all provide relatively high values of attack speed. Most of the current popular builds provide relatively high values of attack speed already. You will almost exclusively see Ninja Tabi being built as boots, you'll often see Executioner, Wind Demon, sometimes you will see Kin Scythe as well, though not as frequent at the moment. You will very often see Berserker Shield as well, and all of these items provide a lot of attack speed. And that can on some characters become a bit of a problem. For example, if you're playing Neath and you're running Devils, Ninja, Failnot, Executioner and Wind Demon, just a random example of a build here, then you would overcap the attack speed maximum with Hunter's Cowl by 17%, so most of the aura bonus would go to waste. Now at the same time this is inconsistent because it requires a Wind Demon proc, so in other times it'll bring you closer to cap and can be beneficial. And I think this is a problem with these conditional passives, especially if you combine Wind Demon and Hunter's Cowl, that you just run into situations where you're either running the risk of heavily overcapping attack speed, especially if your god has steroids as well, or on the other hand, running the risk of being in a situation where you don't have an ally nearby, you don't get that passive, and then you may not get a Wind Demon proc early, and suddenly you have significantly less attack speed and less damage output that way. So it's a relatively fickle thing to figure out, and it depends a lot on the hunter as well. Some hunters have attack speed as low as 1.14, the vast majority is around 1.27 or 8, and then you have the higher end ones with 1.32. So depending on that, a different item combination may work better in some situations. But then you also have to factor in that attack speed slows exist, so those can kind of be offset a little bit by overcapping attack speed slightly. But I do think out of all these items that hinders Hunter's Cowl the most, simply because the attack speed value on that can be so high, which can lead to you wasting stats, but doesn't have to. So what do the other two really offer in terms of damage? If you have a typical hunter build with around 250 power, then in the jungle, with Protector of the Jungle, you'd get an extra 30 power, and if you have a very high power build with around 350 power, then you'd get 42 extra power. That means the total power you would get from Protector of the Jungle normally in a normal attack speed focused build would be 85 power, and the total power in a power focused build would be around 97 power. To put this in perspective, a fully stacked Devourer's Gauntlet has 65 power, and a fully stacked Transcendence has around 100 power. So this would be a very high power option that also provides attack speed along with it, and survivability, which is a very strong mix for late game, but the problem is it only applies in jungle. And what we're primarily after in late game on most hunters is basic attack damage and not ability damage, since that falls off relatively heavily anyways. So what does that really mean for basic attack damage? If we have a build that would normally provide 250 power, then this build would provide 280 power instead. Factoring in the basic attack base damage from Anhur, that would bring the base damage up from 342 to 372. That is a solid increase, but it has absolutely nothing on the potential of Death Temper. Since Death Temper doesn't just affect power but basic attack damage, it multiplies not only the power but also the base damage value. That means with a full passive of Death Temper, 342 basic attack damage turns into 461 basic attack damage. Clearing just one jungle camp with 3 minions will provide you with 377 basic attack damage, so already more than Protector of the Jungle. The problem here is of course that both items are conditional in their own right. Protector of the Jungle is only active in a specific area, Death Temper requires something to die somewhere. This can sometimes be achieved very easily, and sometimes you can get a lot of stacks of Death Temper very quickly, especially while in lane, while at other times you'll have an entire fight without getting any stacks. Likewise, you will have fights in lane, you will have fights at the Phoenix, or you will have fights entirely in the jungle, and depending on that, Protector of the Jungle may have a smaller or larger impact. Where Death Temper really shines, however, is when we're looking at crit. If you use a build with Death Temper as well as Death Bringer, then a non-crit attack would deal 211 damage. If we have full stacks of Death Temper, then we'd have 289 damage from that. On the other hand, with a crit we deal 484 damage, but with a fully stacked crit, we deal 665 damage. And this is against the Neath bot, by the way, so base protections are factored in here. So you can really ramp up the crit damage through Death Temper, which is a very effective way to use this item. And that's also an obvious downside, because crit is likely going to be at least slightly less popular with the next patch. So what do we make of that? As we can see, all of these items have their pros and cons. Death Temper is the most snowbally one of them, and probably also the strongest once you go for that snowball, but that's not guaranteed. Hunter's Cowl is well-rounded since it always provides you with something, but you can't always guarantee that's the thing you need. And Protector of the Jungle comes with nice protection stats, which can be very beneficial, but it's limited to the jungle. One thing I think we need to look at in this context as well are the starter items they come from. That is where I would say Protector of the Jungle falls a little bit short, since Eye of the Jungle received an additional nerf now, so you basically have to stand in the jungle now to really get significant sustain out of it, which can be very tough to do in the laning phase. Leather Cowl and Death Toll are both great starting options for hunters. Leather Cowl again comes with a very well-rounded mix of stats and provides you with decent survivability through the lifesteal. Death Toll also comes with pretty good sustain and actually provides more sustain than Leather Cowl on early levels, even after the nerf. I haven't ran extensive tests yet, but they even out around level 10, so if you have a Devils at that point, that won't even be a major concern anyways. But otherwise, I'm assuming there's a point where the Cowl will overtake Death Toll due to the power scaling that works with the lifesteal. Much of this is because, despite the nerf, Death Toll still provides the flat 2 health and 1 mana anyways. And speaking of mana, Death Toll also provides you with a lot of early mana in general, which is an advantage over the other items. As such, there really are a lot of pros and cons to either option here. What I think makes Death Temper a little bit more appealing is the fact that you have the option to build into Death Embrace as well. So if you feel like the game is going your way, you want to go crit, then you go into Death Temper, or if you realize you want to have a more traditional Kins build and you want to have more sustain, then you go into Death Embrace. And both is possible and you don't have to choose at the start of the game. With Leather Cowl or Eye of the Jungle, you lock yourself pretty much into one route because the alternatives aren't really worth considering for you. That said, especially if you think your character will benefit from the mobility, Hunter's Cowl can be a very good option if you otherwise don't have that much mobility on your Hunter, or if your team has a lot of basic attacking characters. This is one aspect that we haven't really touched upon here, which is that it is an aura of 25% attack speed, which can be pretty massive for your team. This doesn't affect your own DPS that much, but if you have an Erlang Shen near you, or a Kali or Bakasur or whatever, then this can still make a massive difference for them, unless they're already at the attack speed cap. So if you know your team has some of those characters, especially if you have a basic attacking solo laner, then this is a decision you can simply make at the start and say, okay, it's worth it for me to make this investment for my team for late game. With Protector of the Jungle, those situations exist less, and I imagine it will be relatively phased out with 8.3 for the most part, since it is still a heavy investment that doesn't necessarily give you more damage in all situations, so you want to build it primarily to get some more survivability, which requires a build that is specialized around it. This may very well be used at some point, but I don't think it'll be the norm for most hunters. So of these 3 items, I would say that Hunter's Cowl is the most reliable option, especially since it's the only one that can usually effectively be used when your team is being sieged. However, Death Temper is at least a great contender for those who are looking to go into crit, and also gives you the option to go down another sustain focused path if you want to. Protector of the Jungle can be the jack of all trades, but only if the game is going your way and you can actually fight in the jungle. Now there are other starters and upgrades that I haven't talked about yet, and I also haven't talked about magical carries yet. We will do that very soon in a video where I discuss the current state of the carry starters in depth, so if you want to see that and you haven't subscribed yet, feel free to hit the sub button and maybe the bell so that you get notified when that video comes out. Other than that, thank you very much for watching and I hope to see you for the next one soon. Sloth out.